And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays this year, I've been talking to you guys about DB Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And you know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop something down below if you have something to say about DB Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And I am your host, Blackbox Ned. Charlie is here in the chat saying good morning. Good morning to you too, Charlie Don't Surf. And today you can get a cheers from with some black coffee. Orange is the new black coffee. And yes, just coffee today. Scott Bobbitt is here. He says, good morning. Good morning, Scott. How you doing? On November 24th of 1971, a man purchased a plane ticket at the Portland airport. He flew to Seattle, but on the flight he handed a note to a flight attendant stating that he had a bomb and he demanded $200,000 and four parachutes. After successfully obtaining these in Seattle, the plane took off headed toward Reno, Nevada. Originally, Cooper wanted to go to Mexico, but that plane was unable to fly directly to Mexico without a stopover for a fuel point, so they agreed on Reno. And then Cooper jumped out of the plane and parachuted into the night with the $200,000, never to be seen or heard from again. Although some people claim that they've identified DB Cooper and they're able to tell him. And Mr. Flack Nasty said, morning, Ned. Got my black coffee. Orange is the new black today, Mr. Flack Nasty. Cheers. Cat Daddy Steve is here. He says, good morning. And Charlie says, hope you had a wonderful Christmas, everyone. And oh, absolutely. Christmas was a couple days ago. That's why the schedule for Black Box Online Radio was all mixed up and so on. And episodes coming out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Normally, I do a regular lineup where I do an episode about the Zodiac Killer every Monday, one about Jack the Ripper on Wednesday, and DB Cooper on Friday, which you're listening to now, Cooper Friday. And there are two new episodes of the podcast, The Cooper Vortex, which is hosted by Darren Schaefer. And I'm like, two new episodes of the Cooper Vortex coming out right now. Was it Christmas? Yes, indeed it was. And in this one, I really want to focus on the one that he did with Mike Davis. There's another one out there with Ryan Burns, host of the DB Cooper Sleuth channel. And I want to focus on the one with Mike Davis because it's been a long time since I've talked about a lot of his DB Cooper material and DB Cooper observations. Earlier this year, I did an episode called DB Cooper Suspect Ted B. Braden. And Ted Braden is the suspect of Drew Beeson, who wrote the book Paratrooper of Fortune. And when it comes to identifying DB Cooper, there are some aspects of DB Cooper's behavior that people look at. And I've noticed that there's a very big divide with DB Cooper sleuths, where some people think that DB Cooper was just some ordinary layman who threw together some plan to skyjack a plane and to get this type of money. There are skyjackers out there that were like that. One of them that I talked to you about very frequently was Paul Sini, who was just some guy sitting around getting drunk on whiskey, I think was his preferred drink or whatever. And he just had this idea to obtain some money and jump over the Canadian wilderness. The Paul Sini skyjacking occurred in early November of 1971, just days prior to Cooper, about, 11 days prior to DB Cooper's. But then there are other people, like perhaps Drew Beeson, author of Paratrooper of Fortune, who say some things to the contrary, where they think that DB Cooper was not only ex-military, was not only someone who had been to Vietnam, but they think that DB Cooper was an individual named Ted B. Braden, who was perhaps one of the best skydivers in the world, was someone who was like a CIA operative and mercenary, and just someone who had an extremely lengthy resume when it came to all of these disciplines. And that brings us to the title for today's episode. I thought about just doing this as another Ted B. Braden episode, part 2, Suspect Ted B. Braden, part 2. But with this one, I really thought that that might be a little bit unfair because I wouldn't be focusing so much on the aspects of Ted Braden's life as opposed to some very specific things about DB Cooper's military background. And we have Cogitating Jen in the chat saying, hello, I don't drink coffee. Excellent podcast with Mike. Well, You don't drink coffee? I'm sure there's some tea lying around here that I can find for you. And as always, good old tap water. West Virginia has some of the best spring water in the world, mind you. And we have Mr. Flack Nasty who says, how much was $200,000 worth back then? I think it was a huge clue. And Scott Bobbitt says 1.2 million. That's right. It would have had the equivalent of over $1.2 million. And sometimes people are saying that, in today's money, $200,000 wouldn't be that much. This is a side note. This is a side note. And I'm like, if you think that $200,000 is not a lot of money in today's money, I invite you to skyjack a plane, get the $200,000 and bring it to me. If it's no big deal, throw it my way. $200,000 is not a lot of money. All right, but here are some things, though, that were discussed on the most recent Cooper Vortex podcast. Number one, Mike Davis is someone who is ex-military Staff Sergeant Mike Davis, and he has also been trained to jump as well as to jump at night. And he's reflecting upon his experiences as a military jumper and parachutist and looking at that in contrast to somebody like D.B. Cooper. And he, of course, is just in the camp that D.B. Cooper was not some Joe Schmo who never did this before. And I think that a person like Mike Davis would completely cross out a suspect like Milton Bordahl, because Milton Bordahl is a widely discussed D.B. Cooper suspect. And I love what you guys say about Milton Bordahl in the chat in the comment section. And I love learning about Milton Bordahl because he was a fascinating individual. Milton Bordahl was a metallurgist and scientist that focused on metals, particularly titanium. He had numerous patents to his name. He worked on the atomic bomb, one of them that was detonated during World War II. But Milton Bordahl was 58 years old at the time, and he reportedly had no parachuting experience. And what somebody like Mike Davis is doing is saying that, wait a second, D.B. Cooper not only jumped, but he jumped at night. And the people that would jump at night would most likely be the military. And the reason why I used so many of Mike Davis's observations for the Ted Braden episode that I did earlier this year was it was actually requested by Drew Beeson. I contacted Drew and I was talking to him about like doing a Ted Braden episode for Cooper Friday. And what he said was, I recommend you look at the interview that I did with Staff Sergeant Mike Davis. And so as far as the other observations that were discussed, did D.B. Cooper survive the jump? And Mike Davis, again appearing on the Cooper Vortex, mostly said yes. But here's an interesting aspect of this. Was D.B. Cooper able to pull the ripcord for the parachute? And was he able to jump out of the plane in the dark, into the rain, and pull the ripcord? Because some people, maybe even Larry Carr, the FBI agent who was focused on this case, was thinking that D.B. Cooper might not have been able to pull the ripcord. Maybe he just landed and died, and he's in some crater in Washington state that nobody has been able to find. And the answer was 100% yes. And you see this in a lot of widely discussed sources. And I know I always come back to this, but it's the Skyjacker that got away, because that was the very first Cooper Friday episode that I did here on Black Box Online Radio. And what I was talking about was their claim that it would have been very difficult for D.B. Cooper to pull the ripcord in the rain, the dark, and the cold. Mike Davis disagreed completely. He said, not like most likely, he said 100% D.B. Cooper was able to pull the ripcord. And this also begs the question of, well, was D.B. Cooper able to land and survive, or was he able to land and survive successfully? Because those are two very different questions. I mean, and I think Darren Schaefer said something to the effect of, well, did he land and survive with like a broken collarbone or something like that? Maybe a broken arm? Or was he actually just able to land like the way that a lot of people would, doing a similar jump during the daytime? Dan Greider, the YouTuber who has followed the D.B. Cooper case, has recreated the jump. Earl Cossey, the person who packed D.B. Cooper's parachutes, has recreated the jump, albeit to the credit of Mike Davis, they did this during the daytime, not the nighttime. And as far as the actions of D.B. Cooper that day, Mike Davis was saying most likely, yes, he was able to land successfully. How? Because of the terrain. And this is something that was just music to my ears, really, when Mike Davis is saying something to the effect of, I think he wanted to jump where he jumped for a specific reason. Not just that this theory out there that I said has a 1% chance on a previous Cooper Friday. DB Cooper is in Seattle and saying he wants to go to Mexico. Or at the very least, DB Cooper skyjacks the plane that's going to Seattle and he says that he wants to go to Mexico. And they're like, well, this plane can't fly to Mexico. They go through some possibilities and they settle on Reno, Nevada. I don't think he wanted to jump over Reno. I don't think he wanted to actually go to Mexico. I've said for a very long time that I thought that DB Cooper wanted to jump over the Pacific Northwest because it was all a ruse about getting over that specific point. Why would he want to do that? Well, Mike Davis articulated this very well on the Cooper Vortex when he's saying, because of the exact conditions of the land. And everybody's like, well, the Pacific Northwest is filled with forests and trees and rivers and mountains. Wouldn't that be some very bad land? Not the places where DB Cooper jumped over in southern Washington. The drop zones, the estimated and predicted drop zones over southern Washington actually have very, very reasonable terrain for landing. As I just said, you can watch video recreations of these jumps. So that's all telling me that DB Cooper was really, really wanting to be in that part of the area, or at the very least, he had familiarity with the Pacific Northwest, and those places were of suitable conditions for him. And we have Captain Jenks here who says, hi, Ned. Hello, Captain Jenks. Until Tomorrow 9 says, hi, Ned. Hi, podcasterinis. Hope you're all having a great holiday. I remember when DB Cooper did his thing because I'm older than most of you. Here's my Cooper question coming right up. Well, you guys know I can't resist challenge questions. And Cat Daddy Steve says, no one has recreated a jump with the same weather from a 727 at night. No one has, yes, at night. Right. Because to the credit of Mike Davis, he's saying that number one, the people that most likely would jump would be in the military, because that's something that the military is trained to do. And number two, I think a lot of this is done for filming reasons that, like, let's say some amateur filmmaker or like, I think he's a little bit professional now, but some filmmaker like Dan Greider, who mostly makes videos for his own YouTube channel, would encounter an enormous amount of difficulties about filming high quality footage at night. It might not be impossible, but just to set up the operation would even be a little bit difficult. I'm not surprised at all. I think there's so many practical reasons why they would do the jumps during the day for the film. Okay, Until Tomorrow 9 has the question that I said I would get to. Question. Just what was he going to do with the hundreds of thousands of dollars out there in the forest? No car, no clothing, or nothing. This is some of the stuff that was discussed on the Cooper Vortex. Until Tomorrow 9. Great question. And there are a couple theories that people have. And what's the exact term? I'm just drawing a blank on this. Some people think that DB Cooper has the parachute on the pack, right? And the parachute is inside the container that would have been on his back, and that he would have tied the money, and it would have been hanging below him. And this is all laid out in the book Into the Blast by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins, the book that indicates that Kenny Christensen may have been DB Cooper, their suspect. And I've never liked that. I've never liked this concept of he has like this loosely hanging rope or contraption, just like holding the money and hanging it down. And they openly said this on the Cooper Vortex. They didn't like it either. They thought that was really weird. They thought that would create too many problems about DB Cooper colliding with the money, or that it would be unnecessary to have the money free hanging there. The second is that after he lands, Cooper can lose the parachute, then take the money and put the money into the pack, the container, and he can walk out of the forest with the money on his back. That is something that is also laid out in the book Into the Blast, but I think that that is a reasonable observation, and the first one isn't the most reasonable observation. Now, what is he planning to do out in the forest? Well, Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins would say that there was an accomplice that knew where to meet him. That accomplice has since been identified as Bernie Geisman. I What's his name in the book Into the Blast? They changed his name for legal reasons. I think it was like Mike Williams or something, but his real name was Bernie Geisman. Number one, some people think that he had an accomplice. Number two, and these are the things that Mike Davis does so incredibly well. Even if it turns out that not all of his observations are spot on, these are the things that he does incredibly well, stating that this was all meticulously planned and that D.B. Cooper would have planned 48, 72, 96 hours in advance after what he was going to do upon landing. So he would have had a very, very clear and solid plan on what to do, even if he didn't. I mean, even if I can't tell you exactly what it was. Because what Mike Davis is trying to say is, hence the title of this episode, that comes back to the type of military-minded thinking that D.B. Cooper could have possibly possessed. The next point. This is something directly from the Cooper Vortex episode that I was just talking about. And that relates to the weather conditions. Darren Schaefer asked Mike Davis a very interesting challenge question, and that was, do you think that Cooper would have looked at the forecasts and the meteorological conditions for that day and then went on with the jump? And Mike Davis said, absolutely yes, once again. That D.B. Cooper meticulously planned this to the point of looking at what the weather was going to be like. And something like jumping into the rain at night, why would somebody do that? That would have added to his assistance because the rain is going to destroy evidence, like even like footprints or some type of landing zone, turning everything into mud, so to speak. So what's Cooper going to do out there? I mean, I think the accomplice theory is reasonable. I mean, if somebody knew where to meet him, get to the nearest payphone and call somebody, if he was able to estimate exactly where he was. Also, that he's just going to put on his pack and walk out of there. And this is another thing that was discussed on a different episode of the Cooper Vortex. And the guest's name was Ron Ravancic, I believe. It's another one of the recent ones. Well, they even talked about he's going to play to his strengths. Maybe he's just an extremely experienced climber and he thinks that he can, not climber, a backpacker and hiker, and that he can walk for 20 miles or something to the nearest one. Mr. Flack Nasty says that he was military or just a civvy with balls of titanium. Now, this is another one, and this is a big thing that I wanted to discuss with you guys on Cooper Friday, because I think this may have been the boldest statement from Mike Davis, and also one of the boldest statements that was leading toward his suspect, Ted B. Braden, who was also Drew Beeson's suspect. And many people out there think that Ted B. Braden was D.B. Cooper. Aunt Lisa believes that Ted B. Braden was D.B. Cooper. And that is that it is that he experienced way more intense things than this in the military. I'm going to read Mr. Flack Nasty's comment again. He was military or just a civvy with balls of titanium. Well, what does D.B. Cooper do that would show that he was someone who had balls of titanium, period? It's not just that he was ex-military. What do you think about people like Richard Floyd McCoy, who was not only ex-military, he was a Green Beret. And on the plane, he's a sweaty, bumbling mess. Richard Floyd McCoy applied this type of bronzing tan solution to his body, and he started to sweat it off, and it was like, because he was sweating so much that the tanning solution began to drip. With somebody like D.B. Cooper, everybody's reporting that he's cool, calm, and collected, or just that he doesn't seem like he is overly nervous. And I encounter this in the true crime world all the time. People can be overly nervous and not show it. People are able to mask their emotions. But I don't think that's what Cooper was doing, and Mike Davis didn't either, and Darren Schaefer didn't either. It's more like what he said, Mike Davis said, was that Cooper had most likely experienced events in the military that were more intense than what he was dealing with on the plane. He had most likely jumped in more intense situations than he had on the plane going from Seattle across southern Washington. This would all lean toward a suspect like Ted B. Braden. And it's entirely possible, though, that this was a civilian with balls of titanium. This is an unsolved case. And that was another great question that was brought up on the Cooper Vortex. Why hasn't the D.B. Cooper case been solved? And Mike Davis simply said, because we haven't solved it. Yes, I mean, I know that doesn't add to the discussion, but this is an unsolved case. Maybe it was Milton Vordal with a bunch of courage and a bourbon and 7 Up in his system, and that's all he needed to jump out of the plane. And Captain Jenks says military parachute is made to jump carrying weight in bad weather, low altitude, etc. And someone who could have done that very easily would have been Ted B. Braden, who was actually an expert, not just good, but an expert in halo jumping, high altitude, low opening. And I even discussed this once with Drew Beeson about, do you think that that just makes sense about why Cooper would have jumped at night into cloud cover, into the rain, and that it wouldn't have bothered him so much because he was extremely familiar with pulling the ripcord at low altitudes. Okay, and Spy versus Spy says, what if DB Cooper was actually a woman disguised as a man? Barb Dayton might have something to say about that. Be a very convincing disguise. What if? I need to hear more, Spy versus Spy. Cat Daddy Steve says, the problems. DB Cooper had no jump goggles, cold weather clothes, boots. He would have to have been half crazy, half drunk. I don't think that DB Cooper was wasted. In fact, we know that he wasn't wasted because he only had one bourbon and 7 Up, to the best of my knowledge, and that's not going to make somebody drunk. But as far as no jump goggles, cold weather boots, yes, those are things. Now, one thing that Ryan Burns of the DB Cooper Sleuth Channel likes to talk about all the time is that there's this report out there that DB Cooper would have jumped wearing loafers or just some type of ordinary brown shoe, but it actually appears that DB Cooper was wearing some type of boot, and it's a boot, not a loafer, and that's something for him. And also this thing about DB Cooper not jumping with a helmet. I mean, Mike Davis even brought this up on the Cooper Vortex. You don't need a helmet to do the skydiving. Now, the cold weather goggles, or you say goggles and cold weather clothes. DB Cooper had a briefcase that contained the bomb. DB Cooper also had a mystery bag. And a lot of you guys in the DB Cooper Facebook groups have been sharing things that, are pretty good when it comes to looking at possible choices for DB Cooper's mystery bag. There could have been goggles in the bag. And I think they even talked about this a little bit on the Cooper Vortex on the most recent Mike Davis episode. Orange is the new black. And they showed that there could have been not only goggles, but some type of gloves, maybe even ordinary gloves, maybe even some type of military grade gloves. But I'm just going to go off on a side note real fast, but I am responding to the most recent Cooper Vortex episode, the most recent one that I listened to anyway. Yes, I think it came out 3 days ago at the time of this recording. And that is that, of course, you guys know all about this. There was a big media firestorm over the past couple of weeks from an individual named Dan Grider. Really, it's been like almost a month, really, when Dan Grider was saying that he had found DB Cooper's parachute. And Mike Davis, again, being someone who is from the military himself and a skydiver, is like, no, that's not DB Cooper's parachute. Dan Grider provided an Air Force parachute, and the one that was provided to DB Cooper was naval. So, dead on arrival. And I'm not accusing Dan Grider directly, but this has been brought up even in the comment section here on Black Box Online Radio. Did he just stage that whole thing as some type of twisted media publicity stunt? Did he just stage that whole thing? That's just a question, and a question that a lot of us get curious about. But as far as the actions of the real DB Cooper and his real parachuting experience, it seemed like DB Cooper was not bothered by using those types of parachutes, even if it was one that had a parachute that couldn't be steered by most people. by most people. Ted Braden perhaps could have maneuvered it. But the reason why is because some people are saying that, should Cooper have brought his own parachute? And Mike Davis was of the opinion that no, he should not, because he could have just requested them and he could have inspected them, and it would have been impractical to bring one's own parachute. But there's another major point from this Cooper Vortex episode that I wanted to talk about with you guys. When you look at other skyjackers, like the previously mentioned Richard Floyd McCoy, he gets on the plane, McCoy, and he has a grenade and a handgun. The gun was not loaded and the grenade was a dud. It was fake. Paul Sini attempted the skyjacking in early to mid-November of 1971. He got on the plane with a bomb made of 60 sticks of dynamite. Still, I can't believe that. That must be a typo, right? But that's what it says, 60 sticks of dynamite and a shotgun. And Paul Sini actually discharged the shotgun on accident. And the flight attendant named Mary Dohe, who was his Tina Mucklow, was mostly just saying, "Oh, you didn't mean to do that, did you?" Because she had previously been a psychiatric nurse and she knew how to destabilize the situation. Or she knew how to stabilize the situation. I knew there was something wrong with that sentence. All right. So, did Cooper have a gun? Mike Davis was like, absolutely, yes. Did Cooper have a gun that he was going to use? Is that just like in his pocket or in the bag or something? They're like, absolutely, yes. It's a leverage point. And what I had always thought about in the past was that Cooper would not have had a gun because he has the bomb already. And very clearly, this bomb is smaller than what Paul Sini was using. And you wouldn't need to threaten somebody with a gun if you already have the threat of detonating an explosive that can kill them or hurt them, and so on. Just everybody in the chat right now, do you think that D.B. Cooper was carrying a handgun on the plane? Is it in his pocket, is in his mystery bag? Now, would you agree with Mike Davis's assessment of that, or would you agree with mine that it's just unnecessary for him to do that? And also the possibility of the gun going off by accident, the way that Paul Sini's did, and actually causing damage to the plane while it's in flight. I think that's why Richard McCoy's gun was not loaded. But also with McCoy, side note again, this is someone who clearly was trying to commit the skyjacking without killing people. Fake grenade, unloaded gun. He wanted the money, right? With D.B. Cooper, I'm not convinced, because D.B. Cooper is either, a stone cold sociopath, or he just had very intense military training to the point where this skyjacking didn't bother him. It's almost just like a giant, whatever. I'm smoking 7 cigarettes. All right. I'm going to jump out of this plane, and it's going to be nothing to me because I've done it 100 times before. And let's look at what some of you guys are saying in the chat. And we have one comment here from, oh goodness, you guys are saying a lot in the chat, so I got to scroll around. Wow, this thing is moving fast. I'm going to try here. Until Tomorrow 9 says, D.B. Cooper walked out of the forest? Well, it was easier said than done. And also, where he landed might not have actually been forest area. He might have actually landed in some relatively open spaces. And the first time that I spoke to Darren Schaefer was when I was a guest on his program. And Darren Schaefer says that he grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and he talked about how it's really not as secluded as some people think. When you look at the videos that they use in D.B. Cooper documentaries, and it's all just like literally forests and mountains, rocks, trees, and dirt. He's like, it's not really that far from civilization. Until Tomorrow 9 says, I think his balls of titanium crash landed and his bones are in the ground. What a horrible end to D.B. Cooper. Well, if that's the case, Until Tomorrow 9, where's the physical evidence? Where is the body? Habeas corpus. Where is the parachute? Does Dan Greider have it in a vault? Where is the briefcase bomb? Where is the alleged handgun that DB Cooper may have had? I'm just not seeing any physical evidence to suggest that DB Cooper did not survive the jump. Speculation, conjecture, absolutely. Physical evidence, not so much. And this is something that I think is really shared in a lot of mainstream sources, this concept of how DB Cooper did not survive. You even have people like Larry Carr, the former FBI agent, going very public about this and saying that I don't think DB Cooper survived the jump. Yeah, at first I did. I thought he would have survived with the money, but now I don't. Larry Carr has had some type of reversal on that and thinks that DB Cooper died. Not a lot of people agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think that DB Cooper survived the jump, and I'm not convinced that he would have been extremely injured because, as we brought up multiple times in this episode, the area was not as rough as people are making it out to be. Cat Daddy Steve says DB Cooper would need an accomplice to ensure survival, as he would be close to severe hypothermia and the risk of injury. Well, that's one thing they do say about Ted Braden is that he had a death wish partnered with the iron will to live. So that's something that would definitely be the type of person that would survive the jump without an accomplice. And there is always the possibility that E. Howard Hunt was DB Cooper. And another point that I do agree with Darren on is that at first, E. Howard Hunt looks like the most ridiculous suspect in the world. He's a Watergate co-conspirator working for Richard Nixon, but there actually are some strong points for E. Howard Hunt being DB Cooper. One that the administrations would have covered up for. But as far as accomplices, it's not impossible. I absolutely reject anybody who says that it's impossible for DB Cooper to have had an accomplice. I mean, there could have been so many places where the accomplice could have come into play. What they mean is that they don't think that DB Cooper could have landed and then contacted an accomplice. What did I just say at the beginning? Get to the nearest payphone, drop your quarter in, make a call. Hey, I'm at Washington. Please come get here. I mean, yes, DB Cooper could have had an accomplice. It's possible. Mr. Flack Nasty says he made it. Curtis Johansson is here. He says, great show. Hey, thank you so much, Curtis. You got a cheers with some orange, it's the new black coffee. Until Tomorrow 9 says an accomplice. What if he didn't land anywhere near the accomplice? No, I think his story ended 30 years ago, 40. Until Tomorrow 9, you're losing track of time. It has been over 50 years since the DB Cooper skyjacking. But, what if he didn't land anywhere near the accomplice? You can still get to a payphone and call somebody and say, hey, I'm in such town in Washington, please come get me. But also, this is what everybody thinks, that the accomplice has to be on the ground. Somebody even brought this up in one of the DB Cooper books, that the accomplice could have been on the plane to distract people in case something actually went wrong. Like, let's say, for example, there's something like the Paul Sini skyjacking where the crew is able to overpower the skyjacker and they start beating him in the head with a fire axe. That happened to Paul Sini. Then the accomplice could intervene, although the passengers were gone by the time Paul Sini tried to do that. What actually happened was Paul Sini brought his own parachute and he tied it with a piece of twine, but he tied it too tightly. So he asked for a sharp instrument to cut the twine, and they provided him with a fire axe. But when he was working with the twine, he set his shotgun down and he wasn't paying attention. And that's when he was blindsided by the crew. I believe it's actually the captain was the first one to hit him. And he let his guard down, and then they hit him, and then they took the fire axe. And it sounds like they struck him with both the handle and the sharp side of the axe. So that's why he was in the hospital for so long. All right, well, something like that happens on board. Then Paul Sini. Well, then DB Cooper would have been being attacked. The accomplice could have intervened. He could have done something. He could have been the person with the gun. She could have been the person with the gun. That's just in one possibility. Also, accomplices providing alibis, providing explanations as to how and why Mr. So-and-so was not there on Thanksgiving Eve. Oh, yeah, he was on a hunting trip with me, camping trip with me. We were staying at a trailer. There are so many ways that the accomplice could have functioned outside of being the person to meet them on the ground. And let's keep going here in the chat. Curtis Johansson says, bang the like button. Yes, please. Hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and keep dropping things in the chat. Thank you, Curtis. Good point. Spy Never Spy was says, did they find any cigarette packs near the drop zone? I don't believe so. That would be a great question for Ryan Burns, who probably could tell you a solid answer on that. I don't believe so because, firstly, DNA testing didn't exist in 1971. I don't think they could conclusively say that that was Cooper's unless they were somehow able to match that to fingerprints found somewhere on Cooper's seat or plane on his glass if they had saved that. But I don't believe that there's anything like that logged in evidence. But that's a good point, though, because you would think that if Cooper did hypothetically survive the jump, and let's say he doesn't have the broken collarbone, he doesn't have the broken leg, because he's done way more intense things in the military, then he's able to walk out of there. He's probably going to be smoking up a few things. Captain Jenks says, I saw a documentary and they said that the military even used SR-71, the SR-71, to look for Cooper. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why they think it was somebody like Ted Braden or maybe E. Howard Hunt. But definitely, I think this fits better into the Ted Braden theory because they're like, we probably know who this is. We can find this person and then we can just silence the whole thing. And Ted Braden was somebody who was already pardoned for where's Drew Beeson? He'll tell you the exact thing. It's like he leaves Vietnam in an illegal way. And was he pardoned for deserting? So he leaves Vietnam, then he goes to the Congo to become a mercenary. And then he is ultimately pardoned in exchange for information and for not cooperating with bad actors. Do not quote me on any of that. That's why I said this episode is not a Ted Braden part 2. Although I really want to do that because we also have to bear in mind that we can talk about all of these speculative statements, but there are things about the suspect profiles that should not be ignored. Because you guys know I follow the Zodiac killer mystery, and I don't like a lot of the Zodiac suspects out there. What did Richard Grinnell said? Every Zodiac suspect has massive plot holes and potholes in their theory the size of an SUV or something. Yes, I don't like a lot of the suspects in the Zodiac case. Jack the Ripper, there's some decent ones. D.B. Cooper, there are decent suspects. And I actually think that Ted Braden is a very strong suspect. And there's a very high chance that Ted Braden actually was D.B. Cooper. So we can do the speculative discussions, but I think it's also good to return to the suspect profiles, especially with suspects whom I think are viable. And clearly, you guys in the comment section also think are reasonably viable. And then Scott says, oh, wait, we have to respond to one here. Scott says, maybe that's how they got titanium on the tie. And which was this from Scott? And Spy versus Spy says, maybe he was just nuts. I think Cooper was a little bit nuts. I mean, I said, I'm not completely sure that he was a stone cold sociopath. If he were Ted Braden, he would be pretty nuts. Because Ted Braden clearly was somebody who was doing very daring and very risk-taking things that wouldn't necessarily be found in the average everyday person. Until Tomorrow 9 says, the drop zone, the hundreds of square miles that comprise the drop zone. Yes, that'd be very difficult to find a cigarette pack and to identify that as Cooper's, unless they could use some extremely intense estimation to know exactly where he landed. But we don't even know that. People are talking about different points in Washington, different towns in Washington. And it's not like people are keeping a stopwatch going saying, oh, yeah, he jumped exactly at 8:17 p.m. over this town, and that it's just he had to have landed at this exact location. X marks the spot. Curtis Johansson says, but he got happy when he got the money, right? Oh, yes, absolutely. Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant, said that even though his face was concealed with the sunglasses, his eyes were concealed with the sunglasses, that he was just glowing when he started looking at the money. And Cogitating Jen says, Drew, on our flight from Rome to London, right after 9/11 was the opposite of Cooper on the plane. Oh, I'm not sure what you mean by that, Jen. Captain Jenks says some people say he wore a wetsuit under his suit. Entirely possible. Seems like it would be uncomfortable wearing the wetsuit, the suit and tie, and the overcoat, but wearing the wetsuit because he would possibly be bracing for impact on the water. And this is the stuff that Mike Davis is coming back to. He's talking about how Cooper would have been intensely planning this to the point where he's going to check the boxes, dot the I's, and cross the T's. He is going to look for things that he's going to encounter, possibly landing in the water, possibly, dealing with conditions like rain. And what if Mike Davis is right and that Cooper did look at weather conditions? All right, well, it might be raining over the Pacific Northwest. I don't care. That's good for me. A wetsuit, not the craziest. What's up, Ned? From Manny Grossman of the Grossman Files. Hey, Manny, I don't think I've seen you since you stopped by on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Welcome to Cooper Friday. Cat Daddy Steve says, if I was a high-level military trained airborne ranger and did it alone, I would pre-jump places, a few caches of supplies around my landing zone with supplies to wait out the police search. Very possible. See, that's not a crazy observation, Cat Daddy Steve, especially if it's something that's going to be used for a very short amount of time. Bear in mind that there were jets that were following Cooper's plane, but they couldn't see anybody jump. So if he lands there and he has like a crash pad, for lack of a better term, that's a good observation. And Charlie says, no gun. Yes, I mean, Captain Jenks says no gun. He didn't need one. Wouldn't Cooper have pulled out his gun at some point if he had one? McCoy did. Paul Sini did. Wouldn't he have pulled out the gun to show that he could use this in a threatening way? I think the fact that he didn't, partnered with the fact that he had not only a bomb, but a more convincing bomb than some of these other things like the dud hand grenade. Because, like 8 sticks of dynamite or whatever it was, that's definitely going to be a bigger threat than the grenade, I think. Captain Jenks says the accomplices where I think the money was left at Tina Bar. That's why the rubber band survived. Now, I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to come back to this one. I'm discussing the most recent episode of the Cooper Vortex with Staff Sergeant Mike Davis. And what he brought up was when he was asked, how did the money get to Tina Bar? He was like, it was planted. And I've done a whole episode on the money find at Tina Bar. In 1980, 3 bundles of bills, of $20 bills, were found at Tina Bar in Washington State, which gets that name because it's a sandbar, but it's actually more like a riverbank, as Bruce Smith would say. And the money was found with rubber bands on it, and there were 3 bundles of bills totaling $5,800. So, for the longest time, I did not like this theory about how the money was planted. I was just thinking that people were trying to take a situation and insert person X, imaginary person X, and they're trying to use that as the explanation for everything. Well, what if somebody else secretively did that? What if somebody else who was uninvolved did that? That's just what I thought it was. But the more I think about it, the more the conditions really show that that money most likely didn't get there by natural means. And I lean toward the money being planted at Tina Bar the way that Mike Davis thought it was. And he seemed very adamant about that. Yeah, the accomplice could have planted the money at Tina Bar. Two River says, your voice is different with your face. I get that all the time, Two River. Now, Two River, how did you get that name? Because I'm from West Virginia, and we use the name Two Rivers a lot for the Potomac and the Shenandoah. And even when I was in the Boy Scouts, we used to have almost like a district and section. We have so many different layers of that, like conclaves and districts, but ours was the Two Rivers originally before I joined, and then the district or whatever it was changed its name. So, where are you from, Two River River? And not hard to, Cat Daddy Steve says, it's not hard to use the modern high def fish finder to literally see underwater and search the river area. Yeah, that's fair enough. Captain Jang says, also the wetsuit will protect you from the cold and wind. Sure, sure. Because Cooper is jumping into below freezing temperatures. I think it was 27 degrees Fahrenheit, but don't quote me on that. Cogitating Jen says, I meant Drew was not calm, cool and collected like Cooper was. Oh, flying after 9/11? I wouldn't be cool, calm, and collected either. Cat Daddy Steve says the gun was for post jump ground escapes. If he had one, I mean, I completely see how he would, why it would have been in somebody's mind to use that, but I mean, just the amount of possibilities about how the gun could just accidentally go off and take out a window when they're flying at 10,000 feet. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Cogitating Jen said he possibly had a gun, but that could have been more for after he landed. Okay, you guys are all in agreement. You think that Cooper had a gun, but it was for the post landing issues. Captain Jenks says, I offered $5,000 for one of those certified bills. He refused it and asked for $13,000. I still want one. That's expensive though. $13,000. Am I reading that correctly? And Cogitating Jen says, I hope you know why I use cogitating in my name. I would ask Don Cheney, and there's that one book about the Mikado, and it uses the word cogitate on one of the early chapter pages. Now, Drew Beeson sent me the name of that book, but I always forget it. But yes, it's a cogitate was a word that was used by Don Cheney in the documentaries that were accompanying the Fincher film from 2007. Ned is the Tim Pool of true crime beanie. This is only because it's cold. I miss the Philippines when it was too hot. Nothing ever works out right in life, people. It's either too hot or too cold. Something is always messed up. Two River River, you're saying Kenneth Christensen is DB Cooper. I wouldn't be overly shocked. Other people would be overly shocked. I've had Pat Boland on the channel, and she is very adamant that Kenny Christensen was not DB Cooper. So many things about Kenny Christensen make sense, and so many things do not. I wouldn't be overly shocked, but I think he's just a mid-level suspect. And I mean, Kenny Christensen also had a possible deathbed confession when he just said, "There's something I have to confess to you, but I cannot tell you." And some people think that that was just sexually related, and it wasn't actually confessing to being DB Cooper. But this episode of Cooper Friday is winding down, and to everybody who's listening to this at a future date, what do you think about DB Cooper's military background? Do you think that DB Cooper was ex-Vietnam the way that a lot of people do? Do you think that DB Cooper had a lot of intense military training the way that most people do that? Most people do. They think that Cooper was somebody who was not only trained in the military for the reasons that Mike Davis has stated, but also for the reasons that would just give him the knowledge, the ability to talk about airplanes the way he did. I mean, yes, I think Cooper was ex-military. Some people do not. Give your responses in the comments section down below. I would love to know what you guys think. And share anything you want about DB Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. I am your host, Blackbox Ned. You can get me on Facebook under my personal name, Ned DeHaan, or you can also use the Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, which I'm going to be doing a lot more with in 2025, next year. And then there are always the ways to keep in touch, like Instagram, BlackboxNed88 on Instagram. And I'm going to start using BlackboxNed88 on TikTok a little more next year. Going to be uploading more shorts and reels after the new year. And what is it, December 27th right now? So we're going to have a new year coming by very soon. And an early Happy New Year to you all. Some Orange is the New Black coffee. Yes, just coffee today. And then I will see you guys on Monday talking about the Zodiac Killer. And Rob Beansman, though, asked a question, and we have to end with this. I was about to say until next time, but Rob Beansman is here. Cheers, Rob. Why couldn't the gun have been loaded? And it's responding to cogitating Jen. If he had a gun, it wasn't loaded, he would have had to have had serious training. I mean, Paul Sini loaded his gun, Richard McCoy did not. It's not like there's a rule that says you can't load your handgun. But I think that could have just created the problems of an accidental discharge. And maybe I'm wrong about this, Rob, but I think that Cooper looked at the Paul Sini skyjacking and saw some of the errors that Paul Sini made, and one of them was carrying the loaded gun, which accidentally discharged. And you didn't want to do that. So, I mean, it would be very safe not to have the loaded gun. My take on the subject, I don't know. We don't even know if Cooper had a gun. And anybody who's listening to this at a future date, you can always give your response to that challenge question down below. Do you believe that DB Cooper carried a secret gun on the plane? And I invite everybody to go over and like and subscribe to the Cooper Vortex. You can find that on YouTube under the name Darren Schaefer. Darren Schaefer is the name of the channel, and the show is called the Cooper Vortex. Please like and subscribe over there. And I check out the interview that he did with Staff Sergeant Mike Davis. And that's all for me now. Cheers one more time, and until next time.